if anything, the irony of the numbers for the Conservatives is how well they're connected with young people. You would assume that they're more center-left minded, but the reality is there's a significant group of 18 to 34-year-olds who are very dissatisfied with the housing file. And they want to see some action from whoever can give it to them. And at this point, it seems to be the BC Conservatives. Yeah, they're kind of disenfranchised with what's going on in Canada with, when they look to their future and it doesn't look very bright. I think that's the main message in that. And then John Rustad, the opportunity you talked about, he had this huge opportunity, but I mean, it seems like he can't even hold his party together. And so if people look at that, especially older people look at that and say, well, if you can't even hold your party together, how are you supposed to hold the province together? Well, I think that's, part of the complexity of being the leader of the official opposition is making sure that the caucus is going to be supporting you, trying to figure out a way to establish a narrative that is going to propel you to form the next government. Your job as the leader of the official opposition is to be seen as a premier in waiting. And the reality is this hasn't really happened over the past few months. The party seems to be in disarray, not necessarily when it comes to the caucus or its members, but when you have writing associations saying, please step down, when you have the executive saying, maybe we should consider something different, when you have a difficulty trying to connect with voters in a way that is meaningful, this is why you're having such a hard time trying to get people behind you. And it's also particularly cumbersome for them because, as the survey shows, this isn't an easy thing. It's not as if we have one person there who is going to be 10 or 12 points ahead of the NDP. It's more about the difficulty in trying to get that message across because the Free Enterprise Coalition, as we knew it, is fractured. You have Centre BC organizing, you have One BC organizing. Now, I'm not saying that these two parties are going to be competitive. There's a difference in getting 10,000 people to watch your videos and having 75 candidates ready to run when the election happens. But it certainly speaks about the complexities of trying to form a government that is going to get all of these votes when you have new parties emerging practically every couple of months. Yeah, I mean, you could forgive him on the first fracture because, you could say, well, that was the right thing to do when, Tara Armstrong and Dallas Brody, and that's again, that the other person there, Jordan Keeley. The other one that stepped away from the party, you could say, well, that, they didn't really fit the party mold and that. And then, but Elinor Sturco was kind of like one of the stronger ones in that party. And then I guess, it looked like a challenge to his leadership or something. And then, he exited her from the party. And then there was the other one that fell right away. I mean, I interviewed her, Eleanor, recently, and also the other young lady that stepped away when he actually came out awkwardly and blamed it on her mental health, which was, even if that was the case, that didn't look well on John Rustad. Amelia Boltby from Penticton, Summerland. The reality here, and this is something that the data has shown over the past few months, the best file for the BC Conservatives is crime and public safety. They're not climbing the charts on economic management, on housing. But you ask about crime, we see more people who say that the BC Conservatives are on the right track on this issue and not the NDP. That is the file that was managed by Elinor Sturco. So by essentially asking her to step away from caucus, you lose your best spokesperson. That wasn't a great move on the part of the BC Conservatives. And it's also quite difficult to try to react to something like this when it's so easy for anything to become a political party. One BC is essentially two people who got elected as BC Conservatives suddenly saying we're a caucus and we're going to do these things and we're going to have access to asking questions in the Legislative Assembly, trying to establish things. It's one thing to do this in this early stage, but having candidates who are going to run behind you with the kind of platform that they have, particularly in urban areas, is not going to be easy. Yeah, and then that new party that started up too, Center One, which I interviewed her as well just recently. It's Karen, isn't it? Well, Karen Kirkpatrick, yes. Yeah. She ran as an independent in West Vancouver, Capilano, North Vancouver, Capilano, sorry. It's a complicated issue for them as well because you could look at it and say most people are going to define themselves as centrist. But as we saw with the BC Conservatives, the key to the exercise is actually having an opportunity to be seen as somebody who can win the election or who's going to get more seats than the others. This is what led to the demise of BC United. People suddenly saying the best chance to change the government is going to come with the BC Conservatives. They seem better organized. They could actually get 30, 35, 40 seats. They ended up getting 44, which was great for them. And, it's difficult to try to establish this. In a way, it's reminiscent of what we had in Alberta prior to the last provincial election, where people who suddenly became disenchanted with the United Conservative Party were establishing political parties out of their basement. You have 3 or 4 different parties with 3 or 4 different leaders who were well known and who are essentially saying, we are the alternative and we're more conservative than the UCP and we believe in an Alberta that could be part of the United States, or whatever the flavor of the month was. But it kind of looked like that scene from The Life of Brian by Monty Python. It's so you suddenly have so many people who are very similar, but who claim to be different. And the key to the exercise for that election for the UCP, and Danielle Smith should be commended for this, is she didn't play ball. It's like, we need to continue to be the one party, and we're going to make it as difficult as possible for these minor parties to establish themselves. Now, I don't see the same situation happening with John Rustad.
Yeah. I mean, that's what Jonathan Kay's point was. There needs to be, like Stephen Harper did that, right? He brought all those fractures together, and Danielle Smith basically stood a hard line. So where is that person? And you did this poll, and you had 5 people that you basically polled on: Diane Watts, Christie Clark, Gavin Dew, Eleanor Sturko, and Aaron Gunn. All of them kind of in different kind of political situations in there. I'm not sure, Christie Clark would even want it, I guess. I mean, and then it might be a tough sell to British Columbians as well. After, I think she kind of stepped into a couple of cow pies there when she ran as a Liberal. So, I mean, it'd be tough for her to say that she's running as a Conservative, right? I mean, that would be, like changing coats all the time or changing her hats. It'd be a tough slug, but she still polls decently, I guess.
Well, I wasn't surprised to see Diane Watts and Christie Clark at the upper end of the 50 names we tested. There's a lot of goodwill report from the voters when it comes to these 2 individuals. Diane Watts has more conservative credentials. I mean, she served in the House of Commons as a member of Parliament. But it's really about the name recognition in a way. And I think when you have people of this stature who are doing essentially a statistical tie with the NDP, it shows how difficult it's going to be to get those over 55 voters. Now, Sturko did very well, but she's no longer in caucus. I mean, there might be a scenario where she comes back after John Rustad and maybe she can lead the party. Aaron Gunn did very well, won his election in North Island, Powell River. He's really establishing himself as a young figure of conservatism across the country. So it's not a surprise to see people relating to him in a much more positive fashion than, for instance, what we see with Ellis Ross or with James Moore in the same survey. So out of the 5, the only person who's in caucus right now is Gavin Dew. And I think he's done a very good job trying to raise the level of debate, talking about specifics when it comes to healthcare, when it comes to the economy and jobs. Part of the problem with the Conservatives, they seem to be too focused on memes and trying to make people be really riled up on Twitter. This isn't going to help those who are struggling with their finances or who are hoping to get into the housing market do things differently. I think this is what really sets Gavin Dew apart. He's really talking about specifics. And I think he would be a person, contrary to what is happening to John Rustad now, who would be seen very, very positively by the business community in Metro Vancouver. They've had a hard time dealing with John Rustad because when he was in government in minor roles, we have to say, he wasn't somebody who was particularly respected by the business community.
Yeah, Gavin Dew is very articulate. I've interviewed him, I think, the most. I mean, many, many times. And he's very articulate. He kind of fits that mold, kind of that center right. And he's very much business orientated, but he also has that social conscience. And I think, he definitely, and he's a straight talker too. And he talks simple, right? Whereas, like not in circles. I mean, we see some word salads coming out of the federal politics right now, where you can listen to 5 minutes and you're just like, I don't think I heard an answer in that. But Gavin Dew is pretty straight. Eleanor Sturko also fairly straight when she talks to, like, it's very simple language, which I think is one of the gifts that both of them have there. I'm not sure if Aaron Gunn would take that as a step backwards for himself. Maybe he's looking, you know what I mean? It'd be tough to convince him, I think. You know, Christie Clark, I think, would be a tough sell to most British Columbians. Diane Watts, I'm not that familiar with, but it seems like she has, you know, some stuff going for her too. You know, lots of times people that have been on in media and that have definitely some appeal to people as well, right?
Well, she ran for the leadership, lost against Andrew Wilkinson. People within NDP circles were essentially terrified that she would be the leader. They thought it was going to be a significant challenge. Even when the next election happened, it didn't materialize. Of course, everything changed because of the pandemic. Andrew Wilkinson wasn't able to really coalesce anything behind him. And we had a 2020 election where the NDP won seats that they didn't even expect, particularly in the Fraser Valley. All of those seats, or most of those seats, have now gone back to the Free Enterprise Coalition in the form of the BC Conservatives. But it's, you know, Diane still carries that weight. I think there's especially a very positive perception of the way she did things in Metro Vancouver. And this is ultimately what the BC Conservatives need. You know, you can't get more seats by running the numbers in places where we already won. It doesn't make sense to win seats in Northern British Columbia with 80% of the vote, unless you can break through in specific areas of Metro Vancouver where they haven't been able to do so. Or in the island. I think the federal election provides a very interesting cautionary tale for all political parties. You look at the federal map in the island and it's a rainbow. You got a little bit of green, you got a little bit of blue, you got a little bit of orange, and you get a little bit of red. So it's ultimately about the way in which you connect with those communities. And it's not an area that is solidly behind the NDP like it used to in the past.
You got to find the right candidates and the right mix, I guess. But one of the things for the Conservatives, they need to be ready, though, because this NDP government seems to have a lot of pots on the stove that are boiling over. You know, if you look at their healthcare file, it seems to be like a huge mess, especially when you talk about the interior of British Columbia here, when we're seeing, you know, like mass resignations of pediatricians, psychiatrists, OBGYNs, and then ER closure after ER closure. The crime and safety file is kind of out of hand. And, you know, David Eby even admitted that his experiment there with decriminalization didn't work yet. He still runs it into January. Housing is still bad. And then the uncertainty that's come about with, and I think this is the big one for him, is the Cowichan land decision, I think, and the stuff that's been happening behind closed doors. I did an interview with Jeff Moise, you probably know him too, Aboriginal lawyer. That was a really good interview. And he said that they're continuing doing these closed door meetings behind the closed doors there, that not allowing British Columbians to see what's going on. And I think that's an Achilles heel for him. And that doesn't even mention what happened with the BC ferries, because, you know, like some of these other pots are boiling over so bad that the BC ferries thing has become, you know, like just like, you know, like way down on the list of fires. But you know, like Jonathan Kay said, like, I just think that the Conservatives aren't ready, though.
Well, there's a way to try to establish an emotional connection with voters on all of these issues. You know, if you're over 55 voters looking at the NDP as the option they would support, really focus on the healthcare file. You're over 55 voter, which is, as we know, the one that participates the most in elections, is not going to be on Twitter, is not going to be impressed by whatever meme you created with David Eby's face. That might help your 18 to 34 voter who is already a conservative. So the best way to do this would be to try to discuss the issues that matter to the over 55s. It's consistently healthcare, because most of them are not really preoccupied with the housing market. Many of them are retired, so they're not going to be that worried about fluctuations on inflation. Connect on the healthcare file. That is the essence of the argument for the Conservatives. And it just really hasn't been that easy, because I think they're getting bogged down in a bunch of situations more related to the culture wars. And it's not something that is going to move voters.